Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. I am Greer Howard, and today I am here with Bobby Buchanan. And we are starting off our series about the overview of divorce process in Illinois, and we are in great hands with Bobby. Bobby, how's it going today?
It's going great, Greer. I'm so happy to be here. I know from doing more than 500 divorces that the process is very overwhelming and stressful. So I'm always excited to talk about it and give a little transparency to people who are just learning about it, and maybe lessen some of those fears that our listeners have.
Yes, I always think when you understand the process, it's definitely less scary. So why don't we just start off with what is important to know about the process of getting divorced in Illinois?
I think the most important thing to understand is that there is no one definite process. And what I mean by that is your divorce is going to look a lot different than your friend's divorce, than maybe the horror story divorce you've heard. And there's no reason that your divorce can't be the quickest divorce of all. So what we are going to talk about today is kind of the different ways that it can go so people can think about it and understand what their options are.
So let's start with the end goal, and then we'll kind of go backwards. The end goal is what they call a Marital Settlement Agreement, which is an MSA. So can you break down exactly what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the MSA is where we want to get to finalize this divorce. And what an MSA is basically a contract. So when you divorce your spouse, you're going to sign off on this marital settlement agreement, and that contract is going to lay out what's going to happen with all of the divorce issues. So what are all the divorce issues? There's going to be property issues that you guys got to figure out. There's going to be debt issues that you have to figure out. If there's kids, there's going to be child support issues that you have to figure out. There's going to be child custody issues you have to figure out. There might be alimony issues. We call that maintenance in Illinois, and any other issues associated with those sorts of things. But property and support and kids are the big ones.
Okay, so it sounds like the MSA is absolutely crucial because that's going to provide clarity and it's going to be fair. Is that sort of the end goal?
Yeah, the end goal in a good MSA is exactly what you said. It's a clear document. And where people run into trouble sometimes is they think that an MSA is that they think that if they just have an agreement with their spouse, say for example that we're going to sell the house, that's all that needs to be in the MSA. But really what we have to think about is the contingencies, and that's what lawyers are generally good at thinking about is what happens if you can't sell the house? What happens if the market goes down? What happens if your spouse doesn't agree to move out? So we need a very clear document at the end that considers all these different ways the case might go up or down or good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's really so much more than ending the marriage, right? I mean, it's setting you up for the future to make sure that you're stable moving forward, right?
Yeah, and what's so hard about it is that you have to navigate these issues. You have to think about how you're going to divide your property, how you're going to take care of the debt you might have accrued. But you're not just doing it in kind of a stale environment. You're doing it during maybe one of the most emotional times of your life when your marriage has ended. What you thought was going to be forever is no longer. And that's really, really hard to do just between you and your spouse. That's maybe the biggest challenge is the emotional aspect.
Yeah, I can attest to that, personally. And I feel like during that time, there's so many things that you're not even thinking about for your future that an attorney can really help you think through some of those things because you may not even be considering. So having those things in place, I think, is huge.
So I guess let's talk a little bit about filing for a petition of the dissolution of marriage. Is that the first step?
That can be the first step, although it's not always the first step. So the petition for dissolution of marriage is technically the way that you open a case, but we don't generally like to start there because the petition for dissolution of marriage is kind of, if we think about it like this, like it's almost like a lawsuit. So imagine that you're getting divorced from your spouse and you receive this filed lawsuit at your doorstep that a sheriff is handing you. It's kind of a cold, overwhelming way to start the process. So usually when we're starting the divorce process, we're figuring out the most diplomatic, kind, compassionate way to do it because we want to keep that emotional temperature as low as possible. So while the petition is technically the first legal step, it's not the first strategic step to getting a divorce done in the most stress-free way.
Yeah, so that definitely makes sense. When someone does decide that they want to file, I mean, what exactly does that involve?
Sure. So what that involves is, and let's break this down as far as the practical steps, because when people call the office and they say, I'm looking to start the divorce process, they usually don't have any idea of really what's next. And the way I explain it to people is, once you sign up, once you say, okay, let's do this, what we're going to do is we're going to have you fill out an intake form that's going to give us a bunch of background information. And then we do the next most important step, and that is a strategic onboarding, where we have a conversation with you that's usually 30 minutes to 90 minutes, and we learn everything about your situation. We learn about the key factors of why this marriage is ending, because oftentimes understanding the underlying reasons is going to allow us to give you some advice on how we might start this case. So once we do that, then we decide, okay, does it make sense for us to maybe send a letter to your spouse saying we're starting this process and we're seeking cooperation? Or maybe the situation is so volatile that we need to go into court immediately, in which case we'll draft that petition for dissolution of marriage. We'll put all the important legal stuff in there that we need to. We'll get it filed, and we'll get the other side served so that we can get a court date. But again, that's not the preferred way to do things. Hopefully we catch this before it's turning into, World War III, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, it's so important to, just realize, like you said at the beginning, that everyone's situation is really different. Mm-hmm. So just making that call and starting that conversation, it's nice to have a professional by your side to help you to understand what might be the right next step for you, because it's not going to be the right next step for everyone. So I like that idea. And it makes me think about, okay, so we talked about that the goal is the MSA, like at the end, but there is obviously several different ways to get there. So what would be some of those ways?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways to get there. The first one, which is kind of the dinner table way, if you will, is negotiation. If it's possible to start your divorce this way, this is how I suggest you do it. If you've already separated with your spouse, maybe you're grabbing coffee. If you still live under the same roof, maybe you're doing it after dinner. But you're just starting on a very high level to talk about the issues and break apart, okay, what are we going to do with the house? What do we have in mind for the kids? And seeing how far you can get in that conversation before it stalls out. And some people get all the way to the end where it seems like, oh, wow, we've worked out all the issues. Now let's just take them to a lawyer, see if we've missed anything. The lawyer might have a couple details to plug in, a couple questions to ask, but you've done all the heavy lifting. So that's the number one way to do it, is just the old-fashioned conversation. Now, if that breaks down, if you hit some sort of blocker, then we have to get a bit more creative or sophisticated.
And what might be that next step that's a little more sophisticated if you can't negotiate on your own?
Yeah. The next step is what people need to do if the emotions are running a little higher than is helpful. Mm-hmm. And that is mediation. And mediation is a really powerful method of cutting through the emotions. And a mediation is where you have what we call a third-party neutral. It's someone in the middle who's an expert in trying to help people come to common ground when they're negotiating something. So you'll meet with the mediator. They'll get an understanding of your financial situation, of your situation with your kids. And then they've done this before. So they're going to go through each kind of big area and help you guys talk through it. And a lot of cases that might not have settled over the dinner table will settle over the mediator's table.
Okay. Now, this is obviously a suggestion, correct? I mean, this is not the judge telling you. This is someone who's sort of looking at the situation and sort of giving you suggestions of what might be a way to come to an agreement. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We call it non-binding mediation, where you can go and do it, and you can even get to the very last step and think you have an agreement, and then you sleep on it, and you say, you know what, this doesn't make sense. I feel like maybe I'm being pushed around a bit too much. And I think that that's an important thing to remember about mediation. It only really works if there's not a major power imbalance in your relationship. And if there is a power imbalance, maybe one spouse is more sophisticated as far as negotiation goes. Maybe there's a domestic violence situation or anger management issues. Those are not appropriate for mediation because oftentimes one person can be manipulated into agreeing to something that they might not have otherwise, or just the mediation process won't be as effective. But yeah, it's not binding. It's not like a judge is saying you have to agree to this. It's supposed to be a natural back and forth between the two parties.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then there's another one called a collaborative divorce. Can you explain that?
Yeah, collaborative divorce is really cool, and it's something that a lot of people don't know about, but they should. Collaborative divorce is kind of the newest type of divorce, and I don't want to make it sound like it's not tried and true, because it is the most effective way to resolve a complex divorce situation. And what it is you're having both parties, before they even start, with their attorneys, sign off on an agreement that says, we're not going to court. We're going to do every single thing we can to not litigate this case. And then they get some other professionals involved. So they get a divorce coach involved, and that divorce coach is the person who's going to keep them both on the rails. So if negotiations are maybe falling off the rails, the divorce coach might jump in and have a one-on-one conversation with one of the parties and say, listen, why are you doing this? We all agreed we're not going to go to court, and help them. Maybe, it's like a little mini therapy session to help them vent or say whatever they need to say to get things back on the rails. You're also going to have possibly a financial specialist, a financial advisor that's involved that can talk through the different implications of the settlement agreement. And this is a process that takes several weeks, if not a couple months, to complete, but is really the most sophisticated way to keep your case out of court, and definitely recommended if you have more complex financial issues and custody issues, and you're both committed to not going to court. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this is not going to work unless both you and your spouse are committed to transparency. There has to be an agreement that you're going to turn over all your financial documents, that you're not going to be hiding bank accounts, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If that's an issue, if you fear that's an issue, then we need to talk about our fourth or our final.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's so interesting. I have not heard of that type of divorce, so it's cool to know that it's out there. But like you mentioned, sometimes the negotiation doesn't work, the mediation doesn't work, and maybe this collaborative divorce doesn't work. And then where are they heading, Bobby?
They are heading to the courtroom, for better or worse. No pun intended. For better.
Right.
They're heading to the courtroom, and the courtroom is sometimes a necessary evil. The court's just really stressful, and it can be unpredictable as far as what's going to happen in court, and it can be expensive. But if you're not getting anywhere as far as negotiation, it's a very effective tool to move things along. It's not a question of whether or not you are going to be able to get divorced. It's just a question of how long it's going to take and what exactly the process is going to be. So if you can't decide on when the house is going to be sold or what that process is going to look like, your attorney is going to file something called a petition for sale of the marital residence. And you're going to go through a process. It usually takes several months. But at the end, the judge is going to say, okay, this house is going to be listed for sale, and here's who the real estate agent is going to be, and is going to lay out all those details. The problem with it is that it takes a long time to get there, and judges do everything they can to not have to make those sorts of decisions, especially in Illinois. The court process is inherently slow. That's why we're always encouraging people to try to do things outside of court if they can.
Yes, absolutely. Have a lot more control if you can decide for yourselves. Now, let's say that you finally, one way or another, have reached an agreement. What would be the final steps to finalize a divorce?
Sure. So the final step to get divorced, the day that you're going to maybe pop open a bottle of champagne if it's been a long journey, is the prove up. And the prove up is a final court date. You're going to go to court at least one time, regardless of how you finalize your divorce. And that's where the judge is going to look over your documents, ask you some basic questions. Your attorney is going to prep you for them. And the answer to all those questions is most likely going to be yes. Just asking you questions. Is this your name? Have you lived in Illinois for X number of days? Is this your signature? The judge might ask you, have you exchanged financial information? Do you feel like this is a fair agreement? You answer yes to all those questions. The judge reviews the agreement and signs off on it themselves and pronounces you divorced. And that is the point at which your marriage is legally over. And that might be a very sad day. That might be a very happy day. But regardless, your next chapter is beginning.
Yeah. So that final hearing is essentially the official step where you are moving forward past this marriage. Okay. And got it. Wow. Well, that's quite a process. And like we mentioned, it is obviously different for everyone. And, today we really covered sort of that high level, the steps of the divorce process in Illinois. But, like Bobby mentioned, it's really personal to everyone's particular situation. And, there's negotiating involved, and there's filing that petition, and then you're finally getting that MSA at the end. So, really today, our goal is to help you just understand sort of that higher level of the process of what it looks like to get divorced in Illinois. Right, Bobby?
Thank you, Greer. Absolutely. I know that maybe we caused you to have a few more questions in this process, but that's what we're going to do in the next episodes of this podcast, is answer a lot of those questions and dive into this process a little bit deeper. So thank you for joining us on episode 1 of this podcast.
Yes. And as you're listening, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We are here for you. The Illinois Divorce Guide podcast is to answer your questions. So feel free to give us feedback, or if there's potential topics that you want us to talk about, we would absolutely love to hear from you. And also, just as a reminder, this podcast is for information purposes only and not to be used as official legal advice. Right, Bobby?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Greer, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
All right. So we will see you next time to discuss another topic about family law. And if you want some additional resources, you can always go to our YouTube channel. Just search the Illinois Divorce TV. You can also find out more about Bobby and his practice on this website, which is rbbfirm.com, or you can give them a call at 312-757-4833. We will see you next time on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.